Fantom is a highly scalable blockchain platform for DeFi, crypto, also decentralized apps and enterprise applications as well. And with me is the CEO, Michael Kong, to explain the latest things you've been doing with Fantom. I always learn something whenever we talk. What have been the latest games? Because I know you were interested in that have been deployed on Fantom.
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me here. It's always great to talk to you about what's been happening on Fantom. So a lot has happened since we last spoke. On the technical side, I think also on the business development side. What we have seen recently is actually quite a few games now deploy onto the Fantom network, which is quite interesting. Despite the bear market conditions that you hear about, people talk about in the crypto industry and the wider tech scene as a whole. We have games across a variety of different gaming spectrums. So we have a few RTS games, or what are known as real-time strategy games. We have a few FPS first-person shooter games that are similar to Overwatch and Call of Duty and that sort of thing. And we also have games that are more RPG or role-playing games, strategy-based. And so it's quite interesting the wide range of games that we're seeing deploy on Fantom. And I don't want to name a whole bunch of games because there are quite a few, I think 20 or 30, that the team recently did a tweet thread about, going through each game and showing the trailers and that sort of thing. And I don't want to mention specific names just in case I miss some of them. Yeah. People get a bit upset with me, and also it's maybe a bit unfair to them if I forget about the names. But yeah, there are a lot of games deploying on Fantom, and people can see the games that are deployed on Fantom recently if you go to the Twitter for one of our Fantom team members called Nick.ftm. He has a long Twitter thread, I think 20 or 30 tweets long, and it just goes through each and every game that's been deployed on Fantom recently, and it's quite high quality, and I think people will be quite impressed by it.
Oh, interesting. And I'm just curious, Michael, your take on, we're seeing the global markets kind of melt down this year. There's been a lot of movement with interest rates and things like that. What's your take on that? How does it impact the blockchain industry?
Yeah, so I think a lot of focus has been, for obvious reasons, on macroeconomic conditions. Everyone's looking at what the central banks are going to be doing. Are they going to be increasing interest rates? Okay, by how much? And people are looking at inflation. And I think the issue for crypto at the moment is that it's kind of seen as like a tech index, or it's kind of like a tech stock. Yeah. So if tech stocks go up, crypto tends to go up. If tech stocks go down, crypto tends to go down. And a lot of it is tied to what central banks are doing, right? Yeah. Because that's just the way that the market works, right? So there's a lot of what we call bear market or negative sentiment in the technology space as a whole. I think what's really important is that in my personal opinion, I think central banks will have to start cutting again. And they will have to start cutting again I believe, in about 1 to 2 years. And the reason why is because government debt is way too big. And there's no way that governments can finance the government debt at 4 to 5% interest rates. And in fact, something very interesting happened yesterday, which is the Bank of England announced that in order to stabilize the markets, they would, I think close to the exact wording was, they would do whatever it took to buy any bonds necessary in order to stabilize the 10-year yields for the gilt, so what are known as the bonds for the UK market, right? And that tells me that in the end, the central banks will have to start cutting again in order to make sure that governments are able to service the debts, the massive debts that they've managed to take on, right?
Well, that's very interesting.
And that to me will lead to more money going back into the asset classes, and basically a new boom of users that will be starting to use tech stocks again, or in particular crypto. So I think what's important right now is that people kind of build the technology out, build a platform, and when the market conditions improve, that's where you can take full advantage of the growth that will come next.
Yeah. Well, the U.S., I believe, has about $31 trillion in debt. So
that's right, and that's just the federal debt. That doesn't include unfunded liabilities. That doesn't include state debt. That doesn't include local debt. That's just the federal debt, exactly. Yeah. And so if they have to pay 6% interest on their yields, for the 31 trillion debt, which is only getting higher, that's not really sustainable. Yeah. It's not. The yields have to be lower so they can service the debt.
Yeah. I recently got a chance to meet, I guess he's your old professor in Sydney, Professor Scholes. Very interesting. What kind of things are you working on with him and the team at Fantom?
Yeah, so right now, we're very much interested in building out the technology to have a far superior platform over the next few years, right? And Bernard and his team have been working on a lot of things since you actually last interviewed him. For example, and I'll be talking about some of this for my presentation at Chainlink SmartCon today. They built a new prototype, a virtual machine, which is demonstrably a lot more efficient than the current virtual machine that we're using. The virtual machine is basically the software layer that execute these smart contracts. So when you have applications on top of the network, they run for what's known as a virtual machine. And each of our phones, when we execute these applications on our phone, they all run on a virtual machine. So we've been able to get preliminary results of about a 45% improvement in terms of performance. They've also been working on improving what's known as storage on chain, right? So making it a lot more efficient to read and write data on chain like a database, right? And that they don't have a prototype of that yet, but that's still under a lot of development and a lot of ideas that they're exploring there, which should create a performance improvement of maybe 4 to 5 times. And actually most of the processing time related to transactions is actually about maybe 80 to 85% related to the storage, and the other 15% is more related to the virtual machine. So a big focus is on improvement on the storage, but also the virtual machine, and that will ultimately get us to much better transaction process in the end. And as I've always mentioned publicly a lot, what do we care about? We care about the user in the end, the user experience. And what is the user experience based upon? How fast does it take for me to process a transaction, how expensive it is, and how secure is the transaction. And so we're always optimizing to that.
Yeah, and we've seen COVID restrictions lifted in many cities around the world, and you mentioned you're here for SmartCon, right? Yeah. So, what kind of things are you seeing at these conferences? What are you speaking about? What's some of the cutting edge stuff that you're hearing?
Yeah, so I'll be speaking at the conference this afternoon. So, Chainlink was kind to invite me for the two-day conference that's going on. There are other conferences that Fantom will be attending as well. Early November, I'll be attending what's known as the Staking Summit, or a Proof of Stake conference held in Lisbon. I think I'll also be presenting at Token 2049 around the same time as well. And we're going to be having our own Fantom-related events as well. So we have a Fantom-related event, kind of a bit of an after party this evening that I think 200 or 250 people have registered, which is quite a lot. But we're also going to have our own hackathons, in particular, our own kind of conference next year as well that we're planning for. So there's a lot of events that are taking place, and what we'll be talking about is why people should deploy on Fantom. The business use cases that we can offer people in terms of technical support, in terms of marketing support, in terms of potential fundraising, and also the technology stack as a whole, right? How you can execute transactions, cheaply but also securely, and take advantage of the technology platform that we've built out.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Michael. Best of luck with all your travels and all your conferences. And
thanks so much. I appreciate the opportunity again. Thank you.